the way business works is by applying business principles to people. We thought if we could apply people's principles to business, that would work much better.
What's up, branding experts? Arek here, and welcome to On Branding Podcast. Today, I have a very special two guests, Benoit Beaufils and Subodh Deshpande, who are effectively founder and partner at Innate Motion, which is a social impact-oriented marketing firm. Hello, guys. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Arek. Great meeting you.
Thank you. First off, I wanted to ask, what's the story behind Innate Motion? Because it's a quite unique brand consultancy, which you call it regenerative purpose agency. So perhaps you can explain what's the story behind the agency and what do you specialize in?
Yeah, with pleasure. We started Innate about 15 years ago on the premise that a lot of the way business works is by applying business principles to people. And we thought if we could apply people's principles to business, that would work much better. So from that premise, we do work that has to do fundamentally in bringing human thinking back into business. So we do that in research, we do that in a lot of brand positioning, we do that in purpose development. And quite naturally, when you talk to people, you tend to understand that having an impact on them that is positive, having an impact on their environment that is positive is actually desirable. So we're quite naturally helping our clients to bring together a notion of positive impact and of business growth.
That's understandable. So basically, you humanize businesses, right? You help them figure out their purpose in the world as the driving force. So they led by that purpose with empathy and humanize those businesses and make sure that they have a positive impact on the world, right? With their services or products, right? And can you give us some example perhaps of brands that either you worked with or you admired would just illustrate that purpose-driven business?
Yeah,
Subodh, you want to start?
I could give an example, and we've also covered this brand extensively. We admire a brand like Moe Coffee, and it's conceived in the Netherlands. But what they really said is they figured out that the world of coffee is bent. Because what is happening is you are growing the coffee in Africa, but you're taking out the coffee from there and processing it somewhere, and the profits are not going to the coffee growers in Africa. And therefore, they created a whole ambition or a mission to make sure most of the profits, 50% of the profits, go back to the growers. Mm-hmm. And to do this, they completely created an ethical or a fair supply chain. And they use blockchain so that people who buy the coffee can see how their money is going back to the coffee grower. Mm-hmm. So it's really reimagination of the agriculture business, of the coffee growing business, so that it's built on fairness. And this also acts as an impetus to the people they serve. The consumers are interested in this transparency, and it's an amazing brand.
And these days, more and more businesses and brands want to be ethical. They want to be purpose-driven, right? Because consumers about that these days more than ever. So basically, you help them put people first or the planet at the center of their business. That was a great example that you just gave us, Subodh. In your work, you combine basically psychology, sociology, anthropology, philosophy, and things like that. So can you just perhaps walk us through a typical process? How do you work with businesses and brands?
It's difficult to define a single process because the asks we get are quite different. But I can give one example to give you something which is very different from Moe Coffee. We did 2 years ago, we helped Jaguar Land Rover define their global purpose. It was a very interesting piece of work because the company had just announced that they were moving Jaguar into an entirely electric brand. They're very engaged they needed to accompany a change in strategy and make sure that 40,000 employees were actually driven into this. So the way we worked with them is in understanding what are the potential areas of impact, what are the potential areas of challenges. You were talking about philosophy. We had really interesting conversations with them on what is luxury and what is the point of luxury in the world of today, right? Mm-hmm. And on the basis of this, identifying areas of potential purpose spaces to then explore those areas with dozens of people within the organization. So we really could hear and understand how people would relate to them to then finalize a purpose construction that for them was making sense. So they've announced this new purpose, which is live the exceptional with soul, and the identity, and they've accompanied that by a sort of identity inside the company. They want to be makers of modern luxury. And what this did is really clarify what they want to do. They want to build the exceptional functional, but they want to make sure it has soul. So they want to make sure they can integrate sustainability into it. They want to make sure they can inspire people with it. They want to make sure that they can gradually push people away from leather, for instance, which for Jaguar is really interesting. So the logic of it is to work with people very closely to construct something that is a very simple narrative that will engage people into the transformation that they want to go to.
So basically, every business and every brand is different. So it's not one fits all approach, but you work closely with people, you work closely with stakeholders, you interview them, right? And you're trying to identify these areas of concern and explore the purpose, and then construct that purpose, help them construct that purpose and the identity for the business or brand. Can you just give us examples? I know you guys gave us 2 examples, but perhaps you have, like Jaguar is a famous brand that we can all relate and understand, right? Because we know this brand because it's so popular. Do you have any other brands that, perhaps famous brands that we can all relate to and understand this concept of purpose-driven branding?
But you want to go ahead? Should I go? Let me talk.
Yeah, why don't you?
No, go ahead.
Go ahead, yeah.
Let me talk briefly about Lacoste. We worked a few years back on the revamping on Lacoste, and you probably know the brand. It's a 3 billion euro brand of apparel. When we worked with them, the big challenge was that the brand was in a bit of a slump. It was growing a little bit, but not very much. And what we helped them understand is that their consumers were very different from the people that they expected they were talking to. They thought they were talking to people who were relatively bourgeois, a little bit well off, and they were a little bit afraid of the presence of, in the people who buy the brand, of sort of low income classes in France and in all places. And they were wondering what would happen. So what we did is we took them to talk to their clients. And we did some of the interviews, but we also have had them do it themselves, because you can have empathy firsthand. It's actually much better than having it secondhand. There's always a bit of hesitation from our clients to do that, but it's always a pleasure when they do it. So they came back and they realized that actually in their clients, the most well-off people, but also the people from lower classes, they all had something in common, which was the desire to be their own person. They were chasing a certain form of success, but they were not ready to compromise. They wanted to be themselves fundamentally. And it was quite touching, that aspiration to make it somehow and show that they could afford decent stuff and be successful people, but never go, oh, and I'm going to have a suit and tie because this is what people expect. I'm going to do it in a different way. So that logic of supporting your own success, but in your own way, they started to tell this story. And that actually drove the brand quite successfully. And if you look at what they are doing today, they've actually capitalized even more. They talk a lot about this diversity. They show people who have the same Lacoste clothing, but coming from very different backgrounds. So celebrating that identity that people who are very different can talk, which is something they found with the people who follow them, who use them, but they've elevated into something that has a much more interesting cultural relevance than just being a nice thing to sell more shirts. So it does sell more shirts, actually. They've gone back to super high growth, but it's also a very positive spirit and a very good inspiration. They've also, on the side of it, worked on their sustainability, but that's a side element.
No, that's a great example. Definitely Lacoste. Our listeners can definitely understand the concept. Subodh, you wanted to jump. You have another example?
Yeah, I wanted to give an example of how we work at Innate Motion and help construct brands for the whole brand team or the leadership team to really know what they're here for. And the example that comes to my mind is we were given with the task to build the brand purpose for Hellman's Mayonnaise, and it's globally available. And at that time, for some reason, the company had decided that since healthism is in, let's talk about Hellman's as being a low-calorie mayonnaise, and let's talk about healthy mayonnaise. And when we began doing these anthropological dives and going to little homes in Philippines and in Malaysia, and we started seeing that mayonnaise actually is about joyous things. In some cases, there were people who were really ill in the family, but they were using mayonnaise to make these amazing food that uplift and makes people happy.
Right.
And we did empathic action in one of our workshops where we made the brand team cook dishes with mayonnaise. And we said, here are 10 things, go and cook a recipe you like with mayonnaise. And then they had a great time. And then we asked them, so did you think about guilt and health? And they said, no, we just had a good time because mayonnaise is all about pleasure. And we said, see, that is the human empathy that you now have. And that is what your calling is about as a brand. And it helped them pivot and focus on the taste elevator and pleasure. So that's the kind of empathy-driven experiences we create for
That's a great example as well. So you help them basically shift their thinking. The initial thought was to focus on health and low calorie. So awesome example. Yeah. Now I have this question. There is this evolution now in our space with AI and all these emerging technologies. What kind of opportunities do you see, or perhaps what are the challenges and opportunities or trends that you see in our industry in marketing and branding?
The biggest change, if you look on the long term, is how people are, you could say, seeing through marketing in a way. So marketing used to be an exercise of stickering, where you could put a different label on the same product and people will buy it for double the price with a slightly different story. But you can't do this now. It doesn't work. Google has been giving people way more information than we can manage. So we know when it's being seen and it's being cancelled at some point in time. So what happens is that a lot of the marketing tools that people were using, the classic positioning, etc., are not working anymore. If you want to build things which are working, if you want to bring on stories of purpose, they have to impact how the brand is made, where it's coming from, how it's produced, and who are the people who participate into it, the impact it has on the planet. All of this is becoming a big part of branding. So the job of a brand manager, the job of a marketing director becomes very different. It becomes a job of leadership where you influence the entire organization rather than just a job where you do your own little thing on yourself and then you sell whatever product the factory can produce. So the nature of the work has changed a lot. And the book we have just published, Subodh, and now Utopia Brands, is really expounding how this is a bit different and how the work of marketeer has turned upside down basically in the last 10 years.
Okay, so it's more about holistic approach now. It doesn't work like it used to, just defining your positioning statement and as you mentioned, just having a slightly different story and slapping that on a packaging or on a brand. It's more now that brand managers, they can impact the whole business, right? Including the product and manufacturing and all the services, right? So through this discovery and definition of the purpose and how we should approach the branding and marketing, we can also influence the whole business and how it operates, right? So it's more of a holistic approach. It's been great talking to you guys, and we're gonna link to your website, which is Innate Motion, very beautiful website. I encourage you guys to check it out. And you also mentioned that you just launched your new book, right?
Yeah, it's an important, I think it's an important book. What we realized in the research we did for it is a lot of people we talk to, a lot of people you talk to probably want to have impact on the world. They want to make brands that are being positive. But we don't exactly know how to do it. It's actually very different. The marketing tools are very different. So the research we've done is suggesting that a lot of brands fail to do that, but a lot of brands are successful. And those that are successful have all of them the same fundamental recipe. What they're doing is they're building at the core of their brand a utopia. So an idea of a better world that we could build together. So think of Tesla imagining a world where we would all drive electric, or Oatly imagining a world where we stop drinking milk. And still, those works are positive. So they put this utopia at the core. And what they do after that is they execute their marketing with 3 design principles, if you will. One, which is to put the notion of abundance at the core. So you don't tell people buy to save the world because it's not nice. Just give pleasure. So engineer ways to give pleasure as you're doing something very positive. 2, a notion of transparency. Very important because people can see through. So if you reflect on your own strategy of transparency, how you explain to people how your products are made, where they come from, what you still could improve, but what you're really proud of, you create a lot of trust and you can drive change inside much better. And then last, a notion of communities. Those companies, what they do is they talk to their communities and they work with their communities rather than talking at consumers. And it's really interesting because you look at a company like Mattel, for instance, the success of Barbie is really interesting, right? Planetary success. And here you've got a global company that's taking a stance on sexism, and you could expect that thousands of people are going to come and say, who are you to talk about this type of things? And you could have a massive backlash. The reason why you don't is because it's been years that Mattel is actually supporting small NGOs, small organizations, and people in education to support the development of young girls and young women. And so they do this work with the communities so that the communities have actually talked about them in a very positive way. And that's a very different to relate to marketing. So if you take all these elements together, that notion of utopia, transparency, abundance, community, you're fundamentally redesigning the exercise of marketing. And that's what we try to push in the book.
Yeah. And in effect, what Benoit is saying is that, and what we are trying to say with the book is that branding is not just a marketing tool for a marketer. Actually, it's a leadership tool, because you can then set the vision of the company, you can design the business model, you can design the relationship with the suppliers, the employees, the community, because everything is guided by this utopia that you want to create. And that's the big shift that Utopia brings. It makes branding a leadership tool, not just a marketing tool to attract people to come and buy your product, but to have a bigger impact on people.
Right, and bigger purpose. Yeah, it's been great talking to you. We're gonna also link to your book. So the title of the book is Utopia Brands. It's about those three notions that Benoit just explained. And so it's about utopia, transparency, and communities. You gave us some examples. There is more in the book. So we're gonna link to the book. We're gonna link to your website. And what's the best way to connect with you guys? Are you active on LinkedIn?
We are both active on LinkedIn, so very easy to join us there.
Okay, so we're also gonna link to your LinkedIn for you guys to connect with you. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Arek.
Thank you.
Thank you, Arek.